can you only be through one source at once?
I literally told you that I would speak. I've just hit record. You are the worst. Oh. Anyway, hello everyone, and welcome to DBAle episode 27. That's right, episode 27. And guess what? Not only are we coming to you from your ear holes on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever it is that you are listening to us on, but we're actually also potentially coming to you live in YouTube land. Hello everyone in YouTube land who can see us. We are Chris. My name is Chris.
And my name is also Chris, probably.
And this is exceptionally weird because this is the first time that we've ever actually captured DBAle on video, right?
Yeah, talk about face for radio. And yeah, after all of that poo-pooing about my premium DBAle idea, now look who's laughing. Sometimes it is a benefit to be the boss.
Is it me because is it me the one who's laughing because I'm the one with this fancy setup that can make us swap between different scenes as and when I like?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, Chris, obviously we're going to be doing a lot of very cool, very fancy things today. We're going to be talking about a lot of very cool, very fancy things and a couple of not so cool things as well. But there you go. It is quite exciting though because today is the last DBAle of 2020. This horrendous year.
Yeah, that one couldn't have come quick enough.
But fortunately, we've got a bumper packed show, so I'd better actually stop just talking and get on with it. So what we're doing today is we are going to set up a pipeline from beginning to end. Today is going to be continuous delivery with Chris, and Santa, because much like chimneys, pipelines need to have packages delivered through them. And that is what we're going to be doing today. We are going to be doing a live end-to-end database DevOps walkthrough pipeline setup thingy with Chris and myself. And of course, if you're following on via audio, we'll be describing everything that we're doing, so don't be disheartened. If, of course, you wanted to swap over to YouTube now and look at our beautiful faces, then you are more than welcome to do so as well. And it will be up on the Redgate YouTube channel, I think, probably at a similar time.
Yeah. If you regularly listen to us on your daily, weekly, monthly commute, then I'd really recommend only sticking to the audio. Video would not be a good idea.
Yes, otherwise you may never listen to us again. Much
For
the
sure.
sad. Indeed. Fabulous. Well, obviously...
If people can see our faces while they're doing this, they might also choose to never watch this again.
Or they might
For
focus on their
very
pipelines.
reasons.
As your
Yes.
DevOps, this is much nicer looking. Are they gone? Are the two... Oh dear. Yeah, we're like the evil Christmas spirits in all of those Christmas-themed horror films.
Although I think I'd quite like to be like the ghost of Christmas Future from the Mickey Mouse Christmas Carol. He was cool.
I'm thinking I would probably
With
be...
his cigar and his hood and yeah.
I would probably
Badass.
be more the ghost of Christmas Present from Scrooged,
Okay.
which I think is the fairy, right? With the toaster.
Yeah. I mean, you said it, not me.
It's about right. I love it. It's one of my favourite Christmas films as well. Not my actual favourite Christmas film, which of course is
Die Hard.
Miracle on 34th Street.
Oh.
The correct answer.
You know what I watched recently?
What?
I've forgotten the name of it. Oh no. The one where like the jingle of the bells and the... Oh no. I can't even remember the details of it. It's the really famous Christmas one.
Oh, every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. You're talking about It's a Wonderful Life. I don't want to die, Clarence. I want to live.
Yeah, you know what that film made me realise? Video, or specifically film production, has come a hell of a long way.
It has indeed. Unfortunately, not
painful.
for DBAle.
No.
Where we are still two bob and a shoestring.
Oh
Or
yeah.
2 nickels and a shoestring, I guess, for non-English listeners. That being said, though, of course, people come to DBAle for one thing, and if not the talk about databases or Data Breach Monthly, they come here to listen to what we are drinking. So, Chris, what are you drinking today?
I honestly have no idea where I got this from, but I have something called ABK Festbier, a German beer. It has a big description on the back in German. So, yeah, who knows what it is?
So, come on,
Proudly
read it out in
Bavarian,
German.
6% for over 700 years. Des Brauers Dank an den truen Biertrinker ist traditionell ein besonders Gehaltvolles Die Aktienbrauer bedanken sich bei
You can stop now.
Ihnen mit diesem. No, that's about as far as I can get.
This has gone well. I think there was a couple of very good words in there, Chris.
Good.
For any,
I can also tell you that the Zutaten includes Wasser, Gerstenmalz, Hopfen, which, for those of you who don't speak German, is water, barley malt, and hops.
Yes, because due to the German purity laws, you can't put anything else in beer.
Yeah.
I would have assumed you would have known about those.
I think I have heard that before.
Okay.
I'm interested to see what makes this a fest beer, though. Ooh, fest beer. So, yeah, we'll see. Is it going to be festive tasting? I really hope not.
You don't want it to taste like a mince pie or a Christmas pudding?
No, not really. I always find that a bit tacky and a bit rubbish.
Nothing tacky about a mince pie flavoured beer.
It's like come October, you get a load of pumpkin flavoured beer, and I'm just like, I'd rather not, though.
I haven't seen a pumpkin flavoured beer, but okay, I'll give you that one. So I, on the other hand, am drinking. I've already been drinking apparently, and it's only 4:30 in the afternoon. No, today I'm drinking this.
What's this?
This is an Ivo double IPA. Now, for those of you who don't know, and that's probably most of you, apologies for the light as well, by the way, it's darkness here, but there you go. For those of you who don't know, there's actually a very tiny brewery that started up this year in a town not that far from where I live. And it's the Ivo Brewery, who are based out of Somersham in Cambridgeshire, and they do some of the most fantastic beers I have ever had. They do an American IPA, which is delicious. I think it's called She Keeps It Nice American IPA. Really, really good. They do a tremendous porter that Andrea loves. All of my friends, like, the shop opens every month or so with what beers they have in stock, and then they immediately sell out within a couple of hours. And then they hand deliver all of the beers to all of their customers within the radius that they deliver.
Wow.
And mine were delivered on Friday, and I saved this double IPA. It's also known as Better Nicer, and it's it is what it says on the bottle. Really, it's a mixture of different hops, and it's vegan, recyclable, all that good stuff. But yeah, they don't waste any words. There's no descriptions. It is just unabashed double IPA at 8.5%, which is going to make setting up a pipeline today interesting.
Oh yeah.
Uh-oh.
Nothing better than drinking and setting up a pipeline.
I've done it before.
I'm sure you have.
Well, if anyone's ever...
We're going to have to talk about that later.
Well, if anyone's ever read the blog post that I did on setting up an Oracle state-based pipeline with Azure DevOps, and it's on my blog, that took me probably about 2.5, 3 hours to figure everything out. And in that time, I was driven to drink. I didn't have a choice. I was like, here we go, Oracle state-based pipelines. But on that note, let's actually get these bottles open and get this show on the proverbial road. As you can probably see and hear, we are not on the actual road. Here we go. You ready?
Right, yep. Give me a countdown.
3.
Okay then.
Wait, 3, 2, 1.
I don't know if you could hear that.
I was going to say that was a little bit anticlimactic.
Yeah. I'm going to have to do the paw next to my headset mic as well. It's going to look really weird.
I actually forgot to bring a glass with me. Wow.
Oh no. Can you hear it?
I can.
Really?
It just sounds like you've gone to the bathroom with your headset on.
Like that scene in... Was it The Naked Gun? I want to say The Naked Gun.
Yeah. It is Naked Gun, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't have one, but I do have my water glass. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a fan of ingeniously simple solutions. So...
Oh dear. Yeah. If there's one thing that we're going to be necking on this podcast, it is, of course, water. Hydrate well, kids.
Stay hydrated. Oh, look at that colour. Beautiful.
We can actually show people now. This is a novelty.
Yeah, so for anyone who's listening on the podcast, it's a really dark, golden, almost copper colour. It's quite well carbonated. Not super carbonated, but I think that's just from the brewing process. But, beautiful nose to it.
In terms of my beer, so I have a nice dark brown caramel colour. One thing I was a little bit disappointed is that it's not held its head well, but it is probably not the appropriate glass for it, so maybe we can forgive that. And let's give it a taste. Yeah, I'm happy to report that that does not taste in any way festive.
So that's
It's pretty good. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Well, it is indeed a fest beer.
Like a good brown German beer.
Right. So we've got our beers, Chris. And now everyone's going to see how quickly I get through my beer and how yours just seems to last forever.
Low sips.
So, slow, small sips. So, today we're talking about putting in an end-to-end database DevOps or change control or change management, whatever you want to call it, pipeline.
The way you describe it, Chris, just beautiful.
Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Exactly.
So we're going to be putting in place this pipeline, and we're going to be using Azure DevOps, right? I think, and SQL Change Automation.
Right.
Wicked. Well, we're already off to a good start. So all we need is Azure DevOps and the SQL Toolbelt installed. Now, fortunately, I have one of our AWS-based VMs available for this particular walkthrough. Ooh. So anyone who's watching will be seeing me actually do this on a virtual machine that we have available. And anyone who's listening, just pretend.
A virtual machine, very fancy.
Indeed. So
cloud virtual machine. What is this?
So the last time we did a Christmas themed episode or a festive episode, that was DBAle 7, I think.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what caused the pandemic in the first place. So we're trying to avoid that as much as we can.
I mean, if any of you haven't listened to DBAle 7, I think I'd gotten the hand of audio editing by then-ish for these sessions, alongside the day job. So hopefully it's pretty reasonable, and also it featured the old Christmas poem as well. So I won't spoil that for you. Go back to DBAle 7 and have a listen.
Or better yet, go back to any other episode of DBAle and listen to that instead.
But we did talk about Santa doing incremental delivery and why incremental delivery is desirable over big bang deployments or big bang deliveries. And I thought it was a great episode. But what we didn't talk about is the practical parts of that. We didn't actually talk about, hey, how do you do this thing from end to end, say, using something like SQL Change Automation. So that is what we're going to do today.
Awesome.
Chris, when was the last time you set up an end-to-end pipeline, do you think?
Quite a long time ago. Like Probably at least a year ago.
Well, fortunately, seamless transition. Here we are to
I'm
your
very
wait.
good at critiquing the things you do, though. So,
Hang on. Look to your right in surprise because you're now looking at the screen.
ooh,
Wow.
wow. I'm also looking at my radiator.
Is it warm there?
Yeah,
Nice and
yeah,
warm.
toasty. I'm going to move the screen to here so that I'm actually looking here.
Oh, I'm just going to look at the camera for a minute. With for anyone listening, I'm making a smouldering, handsome face.
Oscar Wilde, eat your heart out.
Anyway, I'm so sorry if anyone actually watches this. My bad. Uh-oh.
That was a goofy laugh and a half.
John, I've always wanted to be able to do a Goofy impression. I've never been able to. It's always been Scooby-Doo for me.
I mean, that laugh was good enough, I think. You don't need it anymore.
All right.
Cute, 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 cute.
Woohoo!
Exactly. I love how you said this is going to be a pain to edit later, then you're throwing out all this nonsense.
That's fine. The key to editing is to not edit and then to just put everything on the internet and pray that everything will be okay.
Boom. It'll be all right on the night.
Exactly. Brilliant. Okay, well, we're on the virtual machine. We've got a blank desktop at the moment. All we can see is a nice, big, garishly red screen. So we've gone ahead and set up a new repo, or I've set up a new repo in Azure DevOps, and I've called it DBAle pipeline. So
Oh, that sounds quite fun, a DBAle pipeline.
doesn't it?
Like, what's coming out the end of that is probably going to be pretty good.
I mean, judging by the amount of beer we drink during these shows, Chris, use your imagination.
Oh dear.
NuGet packages, that's right. So, even before we go ahead and deliver, before we go ahead and clone the repo, okay, so all I've done is gone back to the default collection in Azure DevOps, and I've just created a brand new project. I've called it the DBL pipeline.
Okay.
It has a Git repository backend, and it's set to agile work processes.
Oh, agile.
Now, the problem is I don't have any databases to work with. I've got one of them. I've got the DBL database _ production, and that's our prod database for today.
Okay.
So, Chris, can you think of any way that I could, I don't know, in just a couple of seconds, spin up a couple of databases for us to work from today?
Oh, that's tricky, Chris. Gee whiz, I hope you have a backup to restore, but that's going to take a little while. Or alternatively, we could just create a brand new database and manually recreate everything. That's going to be a bit tricky, though.
Yeah.
I wonder, do we have some kind of cloning technology we can use?
Well, you're lucky there, Chris, because actually we definitely do. So the good thing here is that if I open up... Wait, hang on. Where am I? Who am I? So I've just opened up Chrome and I've jumped over to Redgate SQL Clone. So for the benefit of everyone listening, I haven't yet created any images or any clones of my DBL production database. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Create Image. So you can create an image from a live backup or from a SQL Server database. I, of course, am going to go from a live SQL Server database. Quickly
For the
create...
record, most people tend to do it from a database rather than, from a backup rather than from a database.
Yes.
It's actually pretty rare to do it from a live database, we tend to find, which makes sense. Like you take the backup, you do it from backup. Why affect the live production system if you don't have to?
Yep, exactly. And so what I'm going to do here is, because this is actually a copy of my production database, and actually the DBAle database is just a clone or a copy of my DM database, which you can find in my GitHub, should you wish to download it and have a walkthrough of this as well.
In your GitHub?
In my GitHub.
And if people want to find that, where'd they go, Chris?
GitHub.com.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh dear, no, but I'll share it on Twitter after this, after we get this all out as well. We're also going to start putting the transcripts for this into GitHub as well. So if you want to download the transcripts, if you're hard of hearing, or if you want to follow along that way, then you can again go to the GitHub, and I'll share that via Twitter, etc., to make sure you've got everything.
Sounds great.
Excellent. So, SQL Server instance and database we get to pick. So I've picked my production copy, and now I'm going to specify that I would like to modify the image. Of course, the way that we do this traditionally with SQL clone is I'm just dragging and dropping in now a masking file. So Data Masker produces files called DMS mask set files, which are effectively XML files which have the structure of our rules in, telling us how we want data to be de-identified. Because, of course, as we know from previous DBAles, we don't want that sensitive information in dev and test.
Absolutely.
Then all you got to do is pick the UNC path. So we're actually just going to pick a path to a file share where we're going to drop the image. And of course, Chris, for those listening whilst we create this image, what's the difference between the image and the clone then?
So the image is basically a full restore of the database inside a virtual hard drive. So you mount the virtual hard drive onto the file share. The clone is then, and I think of it like a virtual snapshot, but try to avoid using the word snapshot because people get confused with databases, kind of rightly, because snapshot has its own definition.
Yeah.
So think of it more as a differencing disk that references on a data level the virtual hard drive. So if you think of a virtual machine like Chris is working from here, you might take a snapshot or create a differencing disk and a point in time that will refer back to the virtual hard drive itself, and then you work from that snapshot on the virtual machine. So
Excellent.
that's the principle we're using here. We create as a clone a new virtual snapshot or differencing disk of that virtual hard drive, which includes the full database.
Yeah.
And so when people access the clone, that combined differencing disk plus the virtual hard drive equals the database they're currently working on.
Yeah.
But the beauty here is the ability, like Chris is nicely showing now, that you can spin up multiple differencing disks vis-a-vis clones.
Yeah.
And the combination of those will give you unique views over the top of the original database. So it's almost like you've got an entire team of developers who are working in complete isolation.
Yeah.
The reality is that there's still a little bit of shared resource on the virtual hard drive itself, which means if you have 20 developers versus one developer, there's maybe a little bit more load on the systems, but otherwise they are completely isolated. So I could do something like create a new store procedure on my local clone, and the beauty is that Chris, working on his local system with his own clone, has no idea that I've done that. They're completely isolated in that regard.
Yeah, exactly. And for the benefits of those listening as well, what I've done is I've just gone ahead and spun up a couple of clones whilst Chris was describing that there. So we now have, if we jump back over into SQL Server Management Studio, we should find that now on this demonstration instance, we actually have DBAle database production, DBAle database testing, and DBAle database dev.
Ooh.
Indeed, indeed. So we've got our dev database to work from, and we've got all of the standard objects on it from the DM database. So that's everything from your DM customer table, employees, suppliers, etc.
And also that data has been anonymized as part of this process. So
it has indeed. So if we open this up and take a look at the DM customer table, so for everyone listening at home, the DM database normally has in row 1 is normally Francesco Racciopo, and in number 2 is Donalda Londner. And
You know this data set far too well.
I know it well, but then I know this. Is it the Stack Overflow database normally has Ken J Sanchez, I think, at the top. I think that's one of the examples.
Wow.
Anyway, so we've got Colombo Octave now, and I can't say that word because
Alexa.
yes, I can't say that word because otherwise she'll wonder what I mean. Anyway, we've got that and Robin. And then, as you can see, we've got some nice realistic addresses, telephone numbers, email addresses, etc. For the testing purposes.
If there's anyone listening who has the name Alexa, you have my sympathy for what Amazon has done to your name.
You can change the wake word for them, though.
Oh, can you?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
cool.
It doesn't have to be the A word. It can be the actual name of the device, the E word. And I think it can be the A word, actually, as well, the creators.
So you can't change it to a word of your choosing.
That
Like I
would be
could come
great.
around your house and rename it or rechange the wake word to be Chris. That would be perfect.
That would be perfect. But no, I know some people are keen to change it to like Jarvis or something like that. But no, sadly, not at this time.
Oh, Jeeves, that's a blast from the
That
past.
would be a good one, yeah, wouldn't it? Jeeves, set an alarm for... anyway, so come on, let's get this pipeline in place, Chris. So we've created the databases we need, right?
We have 3 databases, prod,
Excellent.
dev, and testing. So
Yeah.
I presume that we're going to do some changes in dev, and we're going to promote those via source control, via build to a testing.
Yep, but first things first, of course, we need to create our local repository. So I
haven't even done that.
Well, I thought it'd be interesting for people to see because then we need to do the baseline-y thing.
Okay, cool. Let's go for it.
We're not talking about tennis. So I've come back into Azure DevOps and I'm greeted with the screen, welcome to the project. What service would you like to start with? Of course, I haven't set anything up in my project yet. So I'm going to jump over into repos. I'm actually going to initialize the repo with a readme. So we're keeping this pipeline super bare and there's no git ignores, no nothing. We're literally just going with a readme. Now, from here, we're then going to come up to clone, and you can clone the repo. I'm going to actually clone it via HTTP. And if you jump into your file explorer, we should be able to find a location where we want to host our working folders. So these could typically be anywhere. Some people put them in their documents. Some people put them in the C drive. I'm just going to go ahead and pop a new folder in C working folders on my particular machine. And I'm going to call it DBAle.
DBAle.
And then I'm going to right click, and you should have Git really installed at this point. I probably should have mentioned that in a prerequisites. But yeah, have Git installed. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to git clone our repository. Of course, git bash
So
doesn't
if there's anyone who is a little bit more of a Luddite than Chris, like me, I would probably be using something like Tortoise for this.
Yeah, Tortoise Git or what's the tree one? Source tree or something like that. That'd be absolutely fine. Any kind of Git client that you use to interact with your technology of choice. Today we're using Azure DevOps, but that doesn't preclude the use of Azure DevOps with the technology. You might use Bitbucket, or you might use what's another good one? GitLab or GitHub or whatever it is. So I'm cloning the repo into DBAle. There we go. And if we jump back into our folder, we'll actually notice that we've created the folder DBAle pipeline. So that's our remote repo that's been cloned to locally. So we now have our own local kind of copy of the master branch.
Ooh.
Excellent. And from there on out, actually, we just need to make sure that we link our database into source control. Now, obviously, there are a couple of different ways of doing this. Some people know the traditional state-based route of we need to commit all of our objects into our repository. But of course, today we're working migrations-based with SQL change automation. So I've come straight over into Management Studio and I'm going to open up change automation. We're going to get rid of the notification that we keep shipping wonderful, wonderful value. And I'm going to go ahead and hit new project. Now,
what are you going to call the project name?
That's a really good question. So this project I'm going to call the DBAle pipeline. We're just going to call it the same as the project in Azure DevOps.
We should definitely make a thing called the DBAle pipeline, by the way.
The DBAle pipeline would be great, and then people would be able to see, maybe it's our roadmap for what's up and coming.
Yeah.
If you want to be included on the DBAle roadmap, let us know. Send me a tweet, send us an email, dbl@red-gate.com or at plant-based sequel or at Redgate on Twitter, and we'll try and get your suggestions incorporated.
Always email us as well, dbl@red-gate.com.
I literally just said that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that one's clear, because that's the only one I know how to use.
When you said Luddite then.
Yes.
Brilliant. So I found my local repository. I found my top level Git folder and my .git folder, and I'm just going to select that as my project folder. And then all you've got to do is set the development source. Now with change automation, you actually get a whole host of different options for selecting a source of your development changes. It could be brown, it could be barbecue, tomato. Oh, sorry.
Hey,
wrong sauces.
Also, you should have gone for cranberry, surely. Cranberry is like...
cranberry. Horseradish?
Horseradish or bread sauce.
Bread sauce is the single worst thing in the universe. It is disgusting. It is horrible. It is rancid, and it tastes like nothing. It just tastes...
How could something both be rancid and taste like nothing?
Well, I don't know, Chris. Try drinking some bread sauce. You'll see exactly what I mean.
I like bread sauce.
Anyway, so...
I'm also surprised that you chose to build a clone beforehand rather than using the SQL clone selection.
Yeah, that's my bad. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. Because maybe we have an automated process that builds those clones for us, right? Maybe we're already using SQL provision for the masking and cloning, and now what we want is to put the database under source control.
It does matter, Chris. It does.
So I'm going to pick that existing database. I'm actually going to find the dev database in the dropdown, DBAle database dev, and test the connection. And then... when that's all been done, I can change the shadow database settings if I like. Now, for those listening, the shadow database, that is built dynamically by verifying your changes so that any migration scripts you've edited actually gets run against the shadow to verify that they're working, that they're syntactically valid. Now, the interesting... It's really handy. It's like doing if you delete the shadow, it'll just rebuild it. So you are doing the build before you commit to version control. That's pretty cool.
Pro tip as well here is that you can set that to be on a different instance. So
yes,
depending on setup, that can be really useful, because like we have here, we have a tools instance and we have a working instance. So by putting the shadow, as Chris is currently doing, on our tools instance, it means you don't even know it exists.
Exactly. Just zooming in for everyone's benefit. But as you can see, we've got the local tools instance, which is the separate instance from my named instance where I'm hosting the dev database. So we've changed the shadow to be on the tools instance, and we're going to hit next. Now this is the point at which we get to add filters and comparison options, and I get asked about filters and comparison options all the darn time. Now, as a rule of thumb, when people ask me, when people say, what would you recommend in terms of a filter? I would say, I'm not going to recommend anything because your environment is different from everyone else's environment.
Yeah.
Which is about right.
I'd usually say filter based on project. So if you have one team working on one part of the database, specifically on one thing in that database, then try and filter it based on that. But it's not as cut and dry as saying this schema should be filtered out, this schema should be filtered out.
That's a really interesting point. That's actually not anything I ever discuss with customers. Normally, the discussion that comes up is users, roles, permissions. How? And users' roles and permissions at a database level can vary dramatically between environments. So that would suggest they shouldn't even be in version control in the first instance.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense as well.
So I'm going to stick with no filters for the moment and no additional comparison options. But of course, at this point, I would normally suggest go into compare, create an scpf file, which is a SQL compare filter file, and filter out those users, logins, permissions, etc.
Cool.
So now all we have to do is baseline. Now, interestingly, you've got a couple of different options when it comes to baselining a change automation project. Now, because change automation is a migrations first tool, what it means is that Chris has muted himself if you didn't hear that as well. Classic Chris. But the interesting thing about a migrations approach is that you need to know what you're building those incremental migrations on top of. So with change automation, it's always important to know how you're going to baseline. And if you've got a ridiculously old legacy database that's got 1,000,000,001 invalid objects, then it might be safer to go along the route of using a clone as baseline. Because that means that it's almost like using a backup of the database as a baseline and saying, okay, everything looks like this, and I'm going to build incrementally on top of that. And the good thing is, even if you update the image and the clone, well, the migration log table used by change automation stays up to date. Right? So it doesn't matter if you update the image and update the clone, because what will happen is it will still resolve against the clone and look at the migration log table and say, oh, I know what version I'm at. Do you want me to apply these scripts to the database? Yes, of course. Of course, if you want to update the image that's being used as a clone baseline by developers, then I would recommend creating a new image appended with _new and then doing the rename old and then change to the current image and letting that take over, because renaming the image won't damage the relationship with the existing clones but will allow people to more easily move over. Top tip.
Good tip. I haven't heard that one before.
Yes, well, I've been through it. Hence why it's a top tip.
Let's go with the most straightforward example.
Let's use
here,
a
though.
migration script as a baseline.
Cool.
Okay, so we use a migration script as a baseline, and SQL change automation will then look at an existing database, and for us, that's actually going to be our production database. But realistically, we would say make this a copy of production, something that looks as close to production as possible, so that you can then capture any changes on top of that. The baseline is supposed to be, hey, this is what every database looks like, and then we're going to capture all of the work that's been done on dev, for instance, on top of that baseline. So we create our project, I hit create, SQL change automation starts spinning. I feel like this DBAle is going to be a longer one, actually.
It might be, yeah.
It's the Christmas special!
Woo!
And okay, so what's happened as a result of hitting create the migration script? One thing that we'll notice is that it's told us it's created one migration, the migration script, which is numerically numbered to get the sequencing correct. It's got a date, timestamp, and my username, and it's just a SQL file, basically. Now that's been... go ahead, Chris. Go on.
So I was going to say, the date timestamp is, I guess, the default option, but you don't have to have that, right, Chris?
No, you can rename it, absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and hit check for changes, and basically what that's going to do is it's going to look at dev and it's going to figure out how that differs to the baseline that we just created from production. Now,
it differs.
In this particular case, it does differ. The reason that it differs is because I have a couple of masking tables that have been included here. Now, I'm actually going to deselect them. Again, these should have probably been filtered out. That's my bad for not applying a filter. But typically, I would filter out any masking objects like the rstats and tstats tables. So
What about the employee and invoice line tables?
That's a great question, actually. Let's have a look at why they. Okay, so we've got index naming differences.
Interesting.
Yeah. And we also have... no, it's not index naming differences. It's a trigger. So we've got a difference in our triggers where we've re-enabled them. So that's fine. We'll just ignore the triggers for now.
Right, yep.
So let's make some changes. Let's go ahead and make some changes. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my dev database and open up DM customer. Let's add a column to DM customer. And we'll call it customer DOB, date of birth. And we'll make it an invalid data type. You can tell that this 8.5%
NVG is not a...
you can tell this was an 8.5% beer. I mean, that's an oops. Hang on, I've still got my site. I'm good. So we've got customer DOB, nvarchar. No, we don't want an nvarchar. We want a date time because birthdays are date times.
Indeed.
It's been a long day. So we save our changes. So we've added the new column. So we used the designer window in SSMS to add a customer date of birth, which is a date time field. And now we've jumped back over into change automation and hit refresh.
And the wheel spins.
The wheel spins, saying checking for changes, and it's now identified that change. So we've got our customer date of birth there. Now, as the only change that is ticked, we can now go ahead and hit generate migrations for this. And because it's a table change, it's gone ahead and generated the migration script. Now, obviously that would be handled differently if it was a programmable object like a stored procedure or a function or a view. That would just be scripted out statically into its state-based representation. But because it's a table change, there we go. We've got a migration ID to track the migration and the alter table statement.
Alter table, dbo.dm customer, add customer date of birth, date time. Cool, perfect.
Null, go, exactly. And I'm going to hit Control-K, Control-Y in SSMS just to quickly apply my set formatting standard with SQL prompt, of course, because it's an absolute necessity.
And Chris, let's say that someone wanted to add in a column that was not null.
Why are you affecting an American accent?
And because this is my corny, not at all scripted line. And if they wanted to add in a default value into those columns, how would they modify that script to add in that logic?
Well, I feel like you want me to answer this also with my best American accent, and so. Advanced.
No, Australian only, please.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Oh.
Otherwise, it's going to come out like this, and then every Australian in the world is going to hate me. No, that sucks. I'm so. It was, wasn't it? I say Hamish is probably listening, thinking, "Shut up, Chris." Honestly, if you don't follow him, hybrid DBA on Twitter, Hamish Watson, the absolute. Just be all and end all. What a wonderful person. The warmest, nicest person you could ever hope to meet. So, Christmas shout out to Hamish Watson. Big hugs. Miss you and hope to see you soon.
He gave a Christmas shout out to all of Redgate, so it's only fair, I think.
Yeah, and it was very good. Anyway, so go and follow Hamish Watson. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually... Oh, God. You've got me stuck in the Australian now. So basically, Chris, no, I can't do it. I've forgotten how Americans sound. What was the question? Oh, editing migration scripts. So if you were adding a not null column to an existing table,
and you want to put some logic in there,
and you wanted to put some logic in to handle the data migration, then you would just open up the script and add your modifications, and that's why we have this verification step. Because we need to be able to run it against the database. So I've just generated that migration script. I've saved it. We've got the changes. And I can now hit verify. That's then run it against the shadow database, which should have been... Chris has muted himself. Every time you mute yourself, Chris, every listener hears you.
As in, it doesn't mute me, or as
No,
in it
it
goes.
goes. Yeah, it goes. So so we've verified our project, and if I connect now to my tools instance, we should see that we have, there we are, the DBAle database dev Redgate shadow. So the shadow database should now have had the migration scripts run against it and should have the customer date of birth column, which it does. So we've verified that my migration script runs. So we're off to a good start. Now I'm going to head over to version control. And this is where we have that native integration with version control. So SQL change automation is actually letting us know what changes we currently have in our local repository, and we can actually see that for ourselves. So if we head over to the local repo and take a look, you should see that you've got the migrations for the baseline, the changes that we've just generated, any pre and post deployment scripts, programmable objects if we've generated them, and of course your create and drop database provisioning scripts should we need them. So I'm going to go ahead and commit these, and you can commit them either through Git by doing a git commit or a git add dot git commit -m git push. I don't really want to do
if
that.
you're like me, who would rather not use Git native tools and just wants to stick in SSMS.
We want the GUI in SSMS, so we're just going to add a commit message with a smiley face.
So
anything to say, Chris?
For all listeners, that's message smiley face is his
in the
commit
commit
message.
details, exactly. Azure DevOps actually supports emojis, so that should resolve to a smiley face. But that being said, that being said, I am committing and pushing directly to master, which don't tell anyone.
So not only is your commit message smiley face, but you're committing to master.
Yes, I am. Yes, and normally I would use change automation to switch to a branch, make my changes, commit, raise a pull request, but we don't have time for that. We've already been talking for 45 minutes. So
really, that long?
Yes. So I'm jumping back over into Azure DevOps, and actually what we should see is that we've got the DBAle pipeline now, and that's actually got all of those same files that we had in our local repo. Of course, we committed and pushed them, and that's just about it. So we've gotten our database into source control along with one additional table change.
And importantly, formatted in the way that you specified.
Formatted in the way that we agreed upon as a company.
So we've committed our change, got it up there. What's the next step?
Well, I don't know about you, Chris, but I had no issues with anyway getting it up there. So we've gotten our database into source control very, very easily. We jumped over into pipelines, and we're now going to build out a new pipeline. So if we jump into pipelines, we get a couple of different options, especially with our older version of Azure DevOps on this virtual machine, which I'm hosting locally. So I pick the project and the repository and the default branch for manual and scheduled builds, which is, of course, the master branch. We've got all of the different files on there. We've got our DBAle pipeline, and now we get a couple of options. Do we start with an empty job or do we go with YAML? Chris, what do you think?
I would go with not YAML, but
YAML is
I've got a
great.
feeling you're going to go with YAML.
YAML is spectacular.
I'm
just saying. Yes.
Is it?
Yeah.
Again, like we've already discussed the Ludditeness.
All right, look. We'll go with the empty job for now.
Those of you who are wondering what YAML is, we covered that on a previous episode.
We did. I'm going to go with an empty job for now. But just know, if you go with YAML, you can actually use Azure DevOps to auto-generate your YAML from the plugins, which is effectively just, it feels like an empty job anyway. So fortunately, so for this particular pipeline, I'm actually going to use the default agent pool. And the default agent pool actually just means that I have an Azure DevOps agent present on this machine, ready to do the builds and deployments for me. Now you can build out agent pools, and you can add additional agents to those pools by going to the project settings as well for each of the projects. And I'm just going with my default pool, which is an agent on this particular machine. But for the build, you actually need to think about what agent is doing that build. What agent has a permission to a local instance of SQL Server? What agent has the permissions to run against an Azure SQL DB? You can pass in Windows auth or SQL Server auth, etc. as part of the build and deployment. But it's up to you. Think about permissions. Think about where you're doing this. Right.
Anyway,
so
interesting bits, Chris.
Interesting bits. Jumping over to agent job 1, and I'm going to add an agent job. Now, at this point, if you don't already, install SQL Change Automation from the Azure DevOps Marketplace. Fortunately, I already have SQL Change Automation build present. So we want the build, not the release component.
Right, and now we get to do the fun bit, configuring the build.
Yes, so this is going to be fun for anyone listening to the podcast. So, for those of you listening, the first thing we're going to do is we've chosen the operation is to build a SQL Change Automation project. So, because we've got that SQL proj file with all the migrations, etc. in, we're going to pick that. And then we're going to locate that SQL proj project. So the SQL Change Automation project, you can actually use the ellipsis, the 3 little dots, to find the SQL proj. And then when it comes to the output NuGet package, we just want to call that something simple so that we can track it. So we'll go with DBAle.database. Now, I'm going to build against a SQL Server because this is going to be running on a local Azure DevOps agent. I'm just going to pick my tools instance and I'm going to leave database blank. And the reason for database being left blank is because when we build, Change Automation will dynamically assign a GUID to the build database name, preventing it from clashing with any existing databases. If you wanted a more persistent database to build against, you can specify the name of that database there.
Or even a clone.
So I've specified Windows auth specifically for this build. So we're going to authenticate against the local repo using the Windows auth for the agent. And then we're saying to publish the artifact. So what that's going to do is make the output NuGet package that the build produces available to the remaining portion of our pipeline.
Good fun.
The only thing that I do want to make sure that I do is append the build ID to the NuGet package version. So if you go down to the NuGet package version in the plugin, when we've added the change automation build step, is you go to NuGet package version and set it to whatever. I've gone with 1.0, the default. But then you can append the build ID to the NuGet package version so that you can hold historical NuGet packages. So that's 1.0.101, for instance.
Hey, are we ready to save and queue?
We are ready to save and queue. So let's hit save and queue and then save and queue again. And that's going to trigger the build from our repository. And hopefully we can see that my message smiley face has indeed kicked off a build. Now, what's going to happen at this point is that change automation is going to kick off. So Azure DevOps is going to initialize the job and get the sources, i.e. it's going to check out our Git repo to a local environment, to the agent, a local workspace to the agent. And then change automation is going to basically, if the change automation PowerShell components aren't already present, then Azure DevOps would call out to the PowerShell gallery if possible and download and make those available. Now, because they are available, it's invoking the database build, and invoking the database build is going to validate our project. It's then going to build the database from scratch, i.e. it's going to run all of the migration scripts from our baseline up to our latest incremental migration. And then that's it. It's going to say, yes, this was a successful build, so I'm going to package up all of the schema, all of the migration scripts, etc. into a NuGet package, which is, as you like to call it, the fanciest of zip files, and make that available to the release stage.
Yeah, that's not quite how I term it, but basically all the components are there.
Exactly. So we've built successfully. We've got our artifacts. Now what do we have to do?
Release.
Indeed, release. So, if I go to new pipeline under Azure DevOps Pipelines Releases, I can then start with another empty job. And then all I have to do is over by the artifacts box, if I add my pipeline, my CI pipeline that has just come by default from my Git repo, I've been able to add the artifacts that are published by that. If you click on the little lightning bolt on that, you can actually enable the continuous deployment trigger to actually, every time we get a new successful NuGet package, go ahead and deploy. You can include additional steps should you wish, but we're just going to go with stage 0 for now for time-saving purposes.
This is called stage 1, not stage 0. Just saying.
I can change the stage name. I'm going to call it testing. There we go.
That's not stage 1 or stage 0.
I'm going to call it testing because we're going to deploy to testing. So what we need now is the Redgate SQL change automation release component. So what you're going to do is you're going to add...
I did not see that coming.
Well, we did the build. So we did the build. Now we're going to do the release. And the release has two aspects to it. You have the build of the release artifact, which is a number of reports that we can review prior to deployment. And then we have the actual release from release artifact that's going to do the deployment for us.
Database package is the required setting. Do you remember your database package name?
Yes. So if we actually click on the little ellipsis for this agent job, so we've got a perform create step. So the display name is perform create. The operation is create a database release artifact, and then we've got to pick a database. Do
we want to
package.
Just create a database release artifact, or do we want to create and release the database release
Well,
artifact?
we want to create and release, but if we do the create first, we can then clone the step, which will retain any of the settings that we put into it.
Genius.
So I'm going to pick my NuGet package that's been published from that successful build, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the number that's been pre-populated there, in this case the 104, and I'm actually going to include an Azure DevOps environment variable so that we always pick up the latest build for release. So that would be $ open bracket build with a capital B dot build ID, capital B, capital I, close bracket. Exactly. So now we've got system working directory, DBAle pipeline, CI, database build artifact, dbl.database.1.0. Brackets build.build ID .NuGet package.
Cool.
And then all we do is create an export path. Now, because I'm doing this on a local machine, I actually have the folder to put. I'm going to create a folder to put these in. So I'm going to go to C, and I've got the folder database deployment resources. And I'm just going to create the. I'm going to create the folder DBAle releases.
With a semicolon in the middle.
With an accidental semicolon in the middle, yeah. And then put that as the export path. Now that is where our reports are all going to go to. Now if we scroll down a bit from there in the create step, we actually now need to specify our server instance, which for us is the default instance on this machine. And then the database name that we're going to create it against is, of course, the DBAle database. Ooh, let's scroll back.
You've forgotten the name, haven't you? It's right there. Don't need to scroll anywhere.
It's the DBAle database underscore testing. Underscore testing. So I specify that as my target database name, pick the relevant authentication method, and then do something very clever. Right click on the perform create task and clone it.
I didn't know you could do that.
Yes. So now we're going to call this one release. And we're going to deploy database changes from a release artifact.
So just to be clear, what we've just done then with the perform create is that we have created the change script itself, and then release is going to actually deploy the change script.
Exactly. So I've specified the operation, deploy database changes from release artifact, and I've added my DBAle releases resources path. So it's going to check there with the appended environment name for this particular release. And then, as you'll notice, it's copied in my SQL Server instance, so I don't need to type it out again.
Genius.
And we're going to hit save. OK. And now we're actually good to queue a release. So if I hit create release to testing, I specify which version I would like, the most recent one we have, hit create, and that's now going to queue the release for me. Now the problem is with this release, if we jump back into Azure DevOps Pipelines releases, we should see that that release has kicked off successfully. And it's downloaded the NuGet package from the previous build stage, and it's going to open it up, and it's going to do a comparison against the target environment, create our release artifacts, and then go ahead and deploy those. Now,
so what's the problem?
Well, we have two problems. Number one, I didn't put a manual intervention step in there. Some people would like a manual intervention step so they can see the changes prior to the deployment. Now, if you want to do that in Azure DevOps, then include an agentless task in the middle between the create artifact and release from release artifact. And that will allow you to review the reports prior to the deployment. The second problem is when the first time you do a SQL change automation release, you won't actually generate any decent reports. So it won't create a deployment preview. And the reason for this is that the schema snapshot and migration log tables are created by this release.
Right, yeah.
So in the
so
first
you need
release,
the second version of it for that to happen.
yes. So that's why I wouldn't advocate including changes in the pipeline like we did prior to your first deployment. Let it see that there are no changes to deploy. Create the migration log table, create the schema snapshot table, deploy successfully, and then start including your changes.
But we've green ticked everything, so that all went well.
Everything is green ticked, everything's deployed. So let's just very quickly run a very quick change through. Now, one thing I'm going to do before that is I'm going to jump back to my build, and I'm going to edit my build and go to triggers, and I'm going to set my continuous integration setting as well. Now, if I enable continuous integration, every time I push directly to master or change branch, merge pull request, etc., that's going to trigger a build, which is then in turn going to trigger a deployment. So I've got my automated CI/CD stages included.
Quick correction there, Chris. I believe you have to also enable it for pull requests. So you have to hit the checkbox first. We haven't done that.
No, that's only if you want to build your pull requests when they're created. It's a pull request workflow. I believe if we merge our pull requests, because that creates activity on master, that will then trigger a CI build.
Yeah, no, you're right.
So we're back in Management Studio, we're back in Change Automation, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly create a branch. Now, in the version control tab of Change Automation, if you go to the branch next to pull, you can then create your branch. So I'm going to go with feature 01. Create the new branch.
Ooh.
Which hopefully should be all well in the world. Which it is. Because that's obviously a clone of master. So I'm going to go ahead and make one additional change. So let's add a stored procedure, for instance. So I'm going to use SQL prompt to do this, and we're going to call it get customers. In fact, we'll call it get customer. And we're going to
even included a schema name at the start of the stored procedure. It's terrible.
Oh, it's fine. So create procedure, get customer, select, and then I will at least get rid of the asterisk. So we've now got a column list.
You got a declare parameter that's not used there, Chris.
Well, that will be picked up by change automation in the reports. So let's leave that there for now. I'm going to run that procedure. So now we've got our procedure get customer. And if
everyone knows, you shouldn't fix in development what's going to be picked up by operations later.
Of course, I have now made the conscious decision to ignore that advice. So if the static code analysis is telling me that I should do something, I should probably do it. You're right. But for now, I'm going to leave it. So I've created get customer. I'm going to generate the migration for this. Of course, it's a programmable object, so we don't have an actual migration script.
Interesting to note, we generally tend to see that about 80% of changes, speaking very generally here, of work changes done to databases are done to store procedures specifically. A lot less is table changes, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it, but most people just tend to assume that database changes means creating new columns.
Yeah.
But reality is, Sprox is the vast majority of the work.
Exactly.
And so actually we have an option here that's enabled by default. You don't have to have it enabled by default, which is to separate Sprox out and functions and views, but Sprox is the main reason for this. And so you don't actually create a migration script when you create or modify a Sprox. Instead, you actually modify that in the old state-based way. And we can see that Chris is writing another bad commit message.
And it just says commit. Yes, and I've hit commit and push to feature 01, which has created the upstream for this particular branch. And I'm going to jump over into my into my pull request, and I'm going to create a pull request for feature 01. There it is. There's my commit smiley face. I would highly recommend you just check out the YouTube video, if nothing else, just for this commit message with the smiley face. And once we've created the pull request, thankfully Azure DevOps picks that up automatically for us. I then hit commit, approve, and I can complete that as well. And that's going to delete the feature 01 branch once I've merged the pull request back into our master branch.
Ooh.
Now, as soon as that merge has completed, we should be able to jump back into our repo and see those updated files. Hopefully. Oh, programmable objects. There it is, get customer.sql. And that, in turn, once we jump from files in repos to our pipeline, should indeed inform us that build, in this case 105, has been queued, and we've got our merged pull request number 1 to commit. And as you see, that has successfully built our change automation project. So that's gone straight through the build process and published our artifacts, which has then in turn queued the continuous delivery of that change to our testing environment.
Ooh.
And in just a couple of seconds, that will then be deployed to the testing environment. And we can, for those of you who have tuned in and who are watching us, then if we jump back into our DBAle releases, we've got release 2 now. And if we take a look at the reports, we should see the get customer stored procedure. So that's been created in the database deployment resources folder we specified in the release. We can see the full script. We can see any comparison warnings, any code issues.
For example,
in this case, the parameter
that
being declared and not used.
That you should have changed.
Yes, I know. But then if finally we jump over into Management Studio and refresh our databases, I should now be able to jump back into my testing environment, which is somewhere. There it is. And if we take a look at tables, at customer, we'll see that we've got the date of birth column has been automatically deployed in the previous release. And then, of course, if we take a look at the stored procedures, our get customer stored procedure is there as well.
Very cool. Thanks,
and
Chris.
That's my pleasure. Thank you. And that was an end-to-end pipeline. I say end-to-end. We, of course, need to add additional steps for deploying to other environments. And it can be way more complex as well. We can add
what happens if you want data in there, Chris? What happens if you want data in there?
Well, of course, we can include clones, and we can deploy to clones where we've got realistic environments we can test against. If we want to include static data, we just use the data tab in change automation. We can do pull request validation. We can do X, Y, and Z. There's tons of stuff we can do.
But we can do all the things.
But what we've been able to do, thanks to obviously the Redgate tools and, of course, Azure DevOps, we've been able to deploy our change upstream, and that's what matters.
And clone. Don't forget clone.
Oh, yeah, and clone, of course. I wouldn't have been anywhere without Chloe. So that's amazing that we've managed to set up a full end-to-end build and deployment pipeline in, what, an hour? I would say that's pretty good.
And that was with a lot of over-explaining as well. And
Exactly.
you didn't even use YAML to make it even more efficient.
Yes, this is true. I could have used YAML. I'm not sure that people like Kendra Little will agree with you that YAML makes you more efficient, but it certainly, I think, helps with something.
I mean, for setting up your first pipeline, probably not. For setting up your second, third, fourth, and fifth, then almost certainly yes.
Exactly. So, we've talked for an hour and 10 minutes. Apologies to everyone that we've talked so much. We really enjoy talking about this stuff. But we've got an end-to-end pipeline. That's what matters. And that is, of course, the delivery of our gifts down the chimney, down the pipeline, to test, to prod, and beyond.
See, Santa's missing a trick. If he hosts everyone on a Zoom call and delivers presents this way, doesn't need to fly around the world.
Exactly. Bish, bash, bosh.
Yeah, think of all the air miles saved.
I can. 14.6 million. That's exactly how many miles Santa would have to travel to get round every house to deliver presents. A little bit.
I love that you actually knew that.
14.665, I believe.
I wonder how they've worked that out. Anyway, that's a question for another time.
It is a question for another time. So it's time for us to move on, of course, to our final, the beloved section, and that, of course, is the news. Wow, that was deep. Deep from you. News. Yeah, I can't do
That was terrible.
News.
That was beautiful, though.
Thanks. So we don't really have too much to talk about today. We don't really have data breach monthly to talk about. We've got a couple of bits. So first things first, I just want to say the DBAle competition is still running and will be running up until the 1st of January 2020. And that is our Christmas competition to win a crate of beer of your choice, a festive crate of beer, or alcoholic, non-alcoholic drink of an equivalent value of your choice. We don't care. We'll figure it out. But, Chris, how do people enter that competition?
Email in at dbale@red-gate.com.
And what do they have to tell us?
What their favourite beer is.
And what else?
That's the only beer I really care about.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah,
I
tell
mean,
us what your favourite beer is.
contact details would be also pretty good as well.
Yes.
If there's any feedback you have for us, then that is something that we really appreciate. And as we spoke about on the last episode, is a present back
in
to
itself.
us.
Exactly. So yeah, we only actually need one thing for you to enter the competition, and that is your favourite beer. Beyond that,
My favourite beer?
No, not your favourite beer, the listener's favourite beer.
Guess Chris's favourite beer. New competition for next year.
Indeed. But if...
This is the magic happening live on air.
But of course, if you also wanted to include any feedback or any topics you'd like us to talk about or anything like that, please do feel free to. That's DBAle at red-gate.com.
DBAle at red-gate.com.
Or DBAle if you prefer.
Works.
There are two other bits of news from me, and that, of course, is number one, the Redgate State of Database DevOps report is still running. If you want to be in with a chance of winning a rather cracking Amazon voucher, which I think is worth quite a lot of money, then do go ahead and check that out. And, of course, the other thing is that DBAle is about to break 10,000 listens.
That's the big one.
That's the big one. I'm pretty excited.
We're going to throw out all our numbers, though, if all of our listeners watch the video instead.
Oh, it's fine. We'll figure it out. We'll add them together. There's two numbers. It's not hard to add them. I'm sure we can do it. You've got a degree in maths. We'll figure it out.
And a calculator.
And a calculator. And we'll figure it out. But we just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you so much to everyone who listens and watches in this case. We couldn't do this without you. We love doing DBAle, and it's nice that Redgate invest in us like this as well. For Chris and producer Louise, who we are forever grateful to as well, who without whom this couldn't be possible. Chris and I, by and large, pay for our own beer. We spend a lot of time recording DBAle, talking
To be fair,
DBAle.
most people pay for their own beer. I don't think that's...
Yeah, but it's not like we expense it or anything. But we work hard on this podcast. We edit it, we upload
We
it.
work hard on this podcast. I'm mostly a passenger, if we're honest.
Everything is done by the three of us. That's myself, Chris, and Louise. And massive thank you to Louise for always being there with us and for us. And massive thank you to you all for being there with us as well. So here's to the next 10,000 listens. Here's to the next 27 episodes. 27, of course, being my lucky number as well, given that
every number's your lucky number.
Well, I was married on the 27th at the age of 27, 27th of April, to my wonderful wife. And it's like, yeah, I don't know, I feel like 27 is a bit of a magical number, so it kind of fitting that it falls in on the seasonal episode.
What mine is?
What's your lucky number?
8.
8's quite a lucky
8.
number in isn't it in China? It's quite a lucky number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The number plate that just has 8 is really valuable there.
Amazing. There is still a couple of bits of news though, isn't there? Mm-hmm. So, Chris, what news is there?
I guess in terms of big industry or community news, the large one of the day is, or the large one of the weekend, has been not quite a data breach, but a significant
security breach.
Yeah. Which is, I don't really know how to term it. So essentially, a company called FireEye, based in the US. So if you've not heard of FireEye before, they're a pretty substantial company. They offer security software, but they detected that someone was using some of their technology in some US federal organizations maliciously. And I think specifically they noticed that emails were being monitored. So they reported on this on the 8th of December, that this had happened. They weren't quite sure how this had happened yet, but continued having a look to try and figure out what was going on. They released another statement on the 11th of December, so a few days later. So specifically what has happened here is that there's been a malicious bit of code put into a third-party monitoring platform. So specifically that is SolarWinds Orion platform. That is, it's a hugely popular product, right? So
yeah,
it's
absolutely
in use in a lot of places and a lot of federal government organizations. And so when that update has rolled out from SolarWinds, that has been deployed out into those organizations.
Yeah.
Specifically, I've heard the term a supply chain compromise.
Yeah.
Chris, if you were going to describe briefly a supply chain compromise, how would you describe it?
Sure. So a supply chain attack is an increasingly popular style of software attack whereby you manage to implant malicious code into the software development lifecycle to effectively allow it to be distributed and pretend that it's part of the vendor's code. So I think the Microsoft example walks you through effectively if you have a server that's connected to by your application that's delivered by the vendor, if you're in some way able to modify a small bit of that code and to clone that particular server and then pretend you are that server, then that allows you to potentially propagate that nefarious code to anyone using that server, which of course could grow exponentially based on the supply chain, right? Is vendor to vendor to vendor, potentially. And what that means is that you're able to build in a very small, very difficult to find exploit, and that in turn propagates to multiple multiple clients, multiple customers, multiple sites. And in this case was just that, a nefarious DLL that ended up being distributed and running kind of just before the rest of the SolarWinds package, which of course is regular behavior for some startup DLLs. So it's really difficult to detect these sorts of things. Windows Defender actually does pick up some of these things in the most recent updates, but it's like SolarWinds said in their press release, it's an incredibly complex, incredibly well thought out, sophisticated attack. And you've really got to feel for SolarWinds as well, because this could have happened to anyone, and unfortunately it's happened to them.
Yeah, it's so the 13th of December as well. Sorry, on the timeline, we've had an announcement that from the U.S. government, an emergency directive instructing organizations how to respond to this. So it's this is a very big deal. I expect a lot of people are probably already aware of this, but yeah, completely echoing what Chris said. As SolarWinds themselves have released a statement saying that they have released an update that should patch this. This was, as you said though, it was a very well thought out attack. It has started at the start of this year and it's taken this long to be detected.
Yeah.
So somewhere between March and June 2020 did this start. And the US government, I presume, or I believe I've read somewhere, that they're treating it as a attack from another nation, most likely Russia.
I believe that's what they've estimated. Yeah, it's a ridiculous situation that we find ourselves in, that enterprises are under attack like this, where in 2020 people are still out to attack others. But I think that I can safely speak for the two of us when I say that our thoughts go out to obviously everyone at SolarWinds and all the security teams who are working to identify and to patch this problem. And obviously we hope for a swift and timely resolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, well, in that case, then,
did you? Note to the end?
It is a somber note, but at the end of the day, it's big news and it should be covered. But it's not pleasant news. That being said, obviously we've got a nice mixture of news there for you, and we are well in advance. So this is really the DBAle bumper special for Christmas, in that we're almost double the amount of time we normally spend talking. But it's been an absolute pleasure as always, Mr. Chris Kurzweil.
I swear that as we've got on and been more experienced at this, the length of the episodes have got longer and longer and longer. The amount of valuable content has got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. It's a true testament to our ability as podcast hosts
to talk rubbish. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Well, in that case then, I didn't have anything else to add, did you?
Nothing from me.
Well, in that case then, if you're watching us on the YouTube machine or wherever this video ends up, I'm giving you a big old wave. Of course, if you are listening to us, thank you again for tuning in. It really is a pleasure. Thank you so much for your continued listening, and please do feel free to let us know, dbale@red-gate.com, what your favourite beer is. Enter the competition. We look forward to seeing you in 2021. But for now, it's thank you from me.
Thank you from me.
And cheers.
And Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas. Season's greetings, whatever. Happy holidays.
Mm-hmm.